So thank you everyone for coming. We're so excited and appreciative to Kelsey for leading this seminar. We host these community support series sessions typically once a month on behalf of A Good Place Therapy. Usually we have a therapist lead it based on a topic or theme that they specialize in. We're a bi-coastal practice with offices in the Bay Area, San Francisco and Palo Alto, and also in New York. We have a range of various therapists on the team who specialize in everything from anger and interpersonal conflict, couples counseling, eating disorders, trauma recovery, the whole gamut. So you can always check out our website if you want more information on that. But a little bit about Kelsey. Kelsey joined our practice a little bit ago, and we're so thankful. She has her own empathy boot camp where she touches on what she's going to speak about here today, but it's like a more, I think, intense boot camp. She wrote a book, and it's been listed by BuzzFeed as one of the 7 things to read to change your life. It's been lauded by Sheryl Sandberg and Liz Gilbert and even Adam Grant. So, I mean, she's really an incredible human being. And I'm so thankful that personally that she's leading this session because, you know, as a working mom of 2 young kids, I personally feel like burnt out all day. So this is like relevant, I think, for anyone across the board. And just one more note, if you do have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I think you can send them even anonymously, like directly to Kelsey. So you can do that too, if you would like. And we will go ahead and get started, and I'll kick it off to Kelsey.
Hey, hello everyone. I am talking to you from Paris, so bonjour. And I'm so glad that all of you came. So it's really good to have you here. You heard a little bit about me. I also am the mother of what is now a 13-year-old. And I thought to share her quote about me. Wait, why isn't my... Excuse me. What's going on here? Okay, hold on. Excuse me, guys. My slides that we just checked are not moving. Why is that coming up? Okay. Those of you who are clients of mine, I know you're like,
let's see. She does. I see her on LinkedIn.
Oh, and if you guys have your microphones unmuted, you can go ahead and mute them.
She's
you know, I don't know what's happening to my...
She does like diversity and equity work, actually. So kind of the function of HR.
Isn't my screen showing up? What's happening?
For the US, global and US for Merck. She used to be for 15 years. Pharmaceutical. Yeah.
Guys, I'm really sorry. There's a
right.
why is my screen not... Can you see the screen? Can you see my slideshow? Can you hear me?
No, Kelsey, maybe try sharing your screen again.
Yeah, okay.
There we go.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right. So I am the mother of a 13-year-old. And she asked me one time when we were traveling with my husband, and she was about 6, and she would not put her shoes on. She would not put her shoes on. And we like had tickets somewhere and we were trying to get there on time. And I literally leaped off the bed, and my hands were heading towards her throat. And my husband had to stop me and pull me back. And then she shouted, "And they call you the empathy girl?" And let's just say that's not only one of my many moments of really losing it, as Daniela said, with your kids. And one of my mentors around empathy, Jody Halper, and she's a brilliant empathy scholar. She jokes that empathy stops at home. And in some ways, that's because the people that we are closest to can sometimes be the hardest to have equanimity, peaceful empathy with. And that's usually the source of our burnout. So we're going to be talking about that right now. And what's so important for us to remember as people who feel like they might have empathy overload, empathy burnout, is that this is about you. We so often, as people that want to care for others, talk about other people and what's going on for them, what's happening with them. And this workshop is really about talking about you and what might be going on for you. And this kind of conversation is both a topical conversation of the kind that we're going to have now, and it's a very deep conversation that you have with your friends or your family, sometimes with strangers, and certainly with a therapist and a group, a peer support group. So we're just going to be focusing on you and what's going on with you. I'm going to ask for hands raised if any of these signs of empathy overload seem familiar to you. If anybody could put in the chat if there's a yes for if this is familiar to you. Yes, Yana, yes. Yes, Mary. Yes, B.S. Smith. Oh, yes, you say. Yes. Yep, Teresa. Yep. Yeah, these are very common feelings to have. And this is really comes up when we're in relationship with other people, where that connection feels very valuable to us. And it's when we feel terrible for having such feelings. And if we tend to be people who value empathy, and not everyone does, we feel especially bad for having these feelings. So we're going to look a little bit more about that with our agenda today, which is what I'll call going over the helper's dilemma. Okay, there's going to be 6 items. Our underlying schema, these are our belief systems that underlie our dilemma. The empathy arc, which explains the role of empathy in the burnout that we're feeling. Then I will get into some of empathy's F words, because they are out there. You'll learn what is a Georgia state of mind, who is that girl that I referenced earlier. And we'll go over some tools to help with what you are going through. There's certainly tools that help me, and I hope some of my clients that I work with as well. I tend to talk softly when I do these lectures, so feel free to let me know if you can't hear me. If you do hashtag empathy whisperer, you might find my name there. So I want some participation from you, and I want to hear from you in the chat, or you can say it verbally. What words come up for you about not being helpful? Like if you're someone who's just not a helpful person, what do you think about like not being helpful? Resentment, can't imagine it, right, Blair? Some of us cannot imagine someone describing us as not helpful. Why not? What are we afraid of, somebody would say about us? Staying solitary, that we're selfish. Yeah, selfish. Yeah. This is such a common fear. Irresponsible. Thank you, SJ. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So common, and it makes sense because we have these sort of moral frameworks that help orient us towards the other. Selflessness, compassion, helpfulness, altruism. There's so many words, pro-social behavior, cooperation, that we are told to value and privilege when it comes to being with other human beings. And thank God we are. However, sometimes people who experience empathy overload can be overrun by these fears. And we start thinking that trying to be the center of somebody's world or even our own world will turn us into this, some greedy, selfish, alone person. Does this resonate? I think it does. I want to ask you now, so we've talked about what it is to not give help and be that person, this guy. What words come up about asking for help? What scary words, what words come up about asking others for help? When you're in a vulnerable, feeling needy. Thank you, Blair. Yeah. And that can feel kind of gross. Rejection, says Teresa. Yeah. Feeling reliant. Thank you, Mary. Yeah. Seen as incompetent. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah. Weak, says Nadia. Yeah. So at the same time that helpers can be very motivated to help, to avoid feeling shame about being unhelpful, being that person, it's not uncommon that the person who is very helpful can be the person who doesn't ask for help very often. Can I hear an amen or a yes if this is you? If you find it easier to help others than to ask for help? Yes, amen. Yeah, yup, says Nicole. Yes, yeah. And this is what I call the helper's dilemma, that we tend to give, and not feel comfortable with asking and receiving. Lisa says, you know it. Yeah. Why would we do that? What is this about? Clearly, if this were just a simple matter of empathy, why is it so toxic? Because it's so much more than empathy. There's so many ways to describe what motivates our connection to other people and what motivates our sense of accomplishment and connection. The framework that I really like comes from Aaron T. Beck, who's considered one of the founders of cognitive psychology. And he says that our motivations center around two key schema that we operate under. And in their negative, those schema are: I am unlovable and I am incompetent. So often, we are trying to become lovable. We are trying to feel competent. And helping others can make us feel more lovable. It can potentially make us feel more competent. And yet, when we're on overload, we start realizing we don't feel any of these things, especially towards ourselves. So what's going on here? Why are we talking about empathy in relation to our own sense of ego and self-esteem? I want to use the science of empathy in a very light framework to explain what's going on. So if we are to understand what is empathy? It boils down to two key components, and this is so mapped out in neuroscience, and it's what you can feel yourselves in relation to others. One is what's called emotional empathy, otherwise called affective empathy. And this is when you just automatically feel in tune with what somebody else feels. It's a very, someone's sad and you feel sad. Someone is happy. There's also empathic joy and you feel happy. And we all have experienced emotional empathy for others and from others. Almost sometimes no words are needed. What's interesting is the region of the brain responsible for emotional empathy is not quite the same as another component of empathy, which takes place in the front of our brain, prefrontal cortex, which is perspective taking, where we can take the perspective of someone else, in a sense, step into their shoes. Of course, we can never fully know what somebody else is thinking or feeling, but even the humility to know that we don't know and that it's worth the mental flexibility to try is in itself very valuable. Taking someone else's perspective to the extent that you can. Empathy, thus, is also considered compassion or empathic concern. And this is when emotional empathy and perspective taking line up. And often people will score higher for emotional empathy or higher for perspective taking. People vary widely in their talents for empathy. Funny enough, sometimes people very high in emotional empathy can actually be somewhat hostile and negative towards people who are outside of their in-group because they respond deeply to people who are like them, who are comfortable for them. This emotional empathy that we feel gets activated when people are similar to us. And so people high in emotional empathy can experience a lot of loyalty for people who they feel are their tribe and not have a lot of understanding for other people's perspectives. This may resonate some with some relatives that you have. And then perspective taking is you can take someone else's perspective, but if there's not a lot of heart to what that person is saying, it can come across as rather clinical, analytical, and unfeeling. Sometimes you may have an interaction with someone where they said the right things, but it felt cold. Often patients feel this way in medical settings or people talking with HR in companies. It's a very disorienting experience. So emotional empathy and perspective taking empathy is the recipe that we're going for when we want to achieve empathic concern. Yay. But sometimes when we feel distress at someone else's need, that's when we start going into the extremes. And this is when our capacity for empathy, taking someone else's perspective, feeling what they feel, goes off the rails. And this is when we get into territory that's called empathic distress, where we are feeling many things that I'll go into later, and then also cognitive distress, thought traps, mental projections, things that we start thinking about the other person and ourselves, and it all gets cloudy. So, for example, when we look at empathic distress, when we're on the extremes of empathy, someone's difficult time, let's say someone's diagnosed with cancer, and all of a sudden you feel angry. Like, why would I feel angry at someone being diagnosed with cancer? And that's because that's not what they're feeling about the diagnosis. You're feeling angry at this person for the inconvenience that this is about to cause you in your life. You might feel anxious when someone tells you they are getting a divorce because you're afraid they're going to need to stay with you. You might feel discomfort when someone is sad. You're not feeling what is called emotional resonance. You feel what someone else feels. Instead, you're feeling empathic distress. Something else is going on for you. And this happens to us all day long, all the time. Does this resonate with folks? I can't see many faces, but I'm gonna assume that it does. Yes, I see Teresa saying, yes, very much so, says Blair. Yeah. So these feelings of empathic distress can be exhausting. So often when we feel fatigue, when we feel shut down, when we feel lifeless, burnt out, it is because we are literally depleted, exhausted by these feelings, and not necessarily the needs of the other person. Very often, when I have clients or people in my trainings say, I'm having trouble managing my time, it's really about managing my emotions. The other side of empathy, and when it gets into distress, the cognitive area of empathy are the thought traps that start to plague us. Excuse me, I'll have some water. And these can include, for example, ones around absorbing, where we absorb someone's problem. I should do this. I should be taking care of my colleague's problem. I should be arranging for my kid to be in after school every day. I should be monitoring their screen time. I should be caring for my mother in our home. I should be listening to my sister, who is critical of me. I should hear her perspective. There's also a thought trap that's absorbing. That's about how we take it on, which is an identity that we might take on. I am always letting people down. I am always screwing this up. I'm always frustrated by her. So we start thinking in absolutes and we start taking it on ourselves. I am a bad person. I am a bad person if I don't do X, Y, Z. You can see this actually has very little to do with empathy. This has to do with the distress we feel in times of vulnerability. And these thought traps make us very distressed. Another frame of thought trap is shifting, where we think, you should do this. You have a problem. You are messed up. You are always so. If I do this, then you will do that. And you start tallying up resentments about what people are or are not doing. We've all done this. And just know, once you start tallying up resentments, you are in empathy. Yep, Blair says spot on. You are in empathy burnout mode. So both of these extremes of empathic are resulting from empathic distress. So what do we do about it? Well, first we have to recognize the signs and which mode of empathic distress we're in. So I'm going to go over 3 that I talk about. And I first want some wisdom from Quora. I was looking up about the difference between Paris and New York, because I live in Paris now temporarily. And it's like, which is better, Paris or New York? And so this is the framework that somebody on Quora presented about Paris versus New York. Which city has ruder people, New York City or Paris? And this person wrote, in New York City, people are emphatically do not give a shit. This makes them rude. In Paris, people emphatically do give a shit. This also makes them rude. Sometimes when there's not enough, sometimes when it's too much, both of this can be hard to be on the receiving end of, right? So what are these empathy styles that we have that can be so vexing for others and also so vexing for us? The first is called the foister. And this is a person who foists their help onto someone else. Take my advice. I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times, you need to do X, Y, and Z. They never take my advice. Somebody who's always trying to push their agenda. This person is not necessarily taking a beat and taking in the perspective of the other person. They're rushing in to fix. The other empathy type is the fretter. And this is the person who worries a lot. Okay. And then we finally have the fleer. And the fleer is the person who avoids the situation. And you can avoid a situation by literally avoiding, but you can also avoid by having emotion that is not congruent with the situation. Someone starts crying and you get really mad because you don't want to sit with their tears. Because maybe it feels like you'll have to take responsibility for them if you do, right? So there are patterns of behavior that we have in empathic distress, and I'll just go through those styles in a little bit more detail. So the foister is probably aiming for a sense of competence. They want to fix someone's problem, be the person that saves the day, and be Beyonce, okay? This person tends to have a very direct communication style with lots of talking or doing, fixing, taking over. And their thought trap might be, if I don't do this, no one else will. Sound familiar? They'll fall apart if I don't do this. But then you find that people don't appreciate my help. You start feeling that people are ungrateful for all that you do. And sometimes people even start avoiding you and you cannot understand why. There's another style, which is the fretter. The fretter is less in do mode, not the CEO that's just going to do, but is more the feelings detective, the person who intuits really well, tends to be anxious, and anxious people do have typically a high empathic accuracy score. And they tend to fret and be in a rut and not take a lot of action, but think a lot about the problem and the person. They can be very, very insecure about getting it right. And so they might be very preoccupied with people pleasing, making sure it's the right gesture, it's going to land, it's going to make a difference, it's not going to insult. They're going to be reading for cues, interpreting, doing a lot of second guessing. They didn't thank me for the gesture that I made. The communication might be somewhat indirect and somewhat passive. I can do this if you want. And it can be sometimes hard to read. And then you have the fleer. And the fleer can avoid feeling with excessive abstraction and rationalization. And I see this a lot in my client work, where some of my clients, and you know who you are if you're here, are very involved in the other person's perspective. And they do a lot of perspective taking and not a lot of sitting with the emotion. And in some ways, it's about fleeing the emotion. And we do that to ourselves. We will flee our own emotions in order to be of service to someone else. We might have some addictive behaviors. The phone, a classic. When we start feeling anxious, we're waiting for somebody. We feel doubtful. We've just been in an argument. We're trying to anticipate a conflict. We might start going to just automatically. There might also be an effort to avoid feelings with desperate socialization. where it's all very light and fun and drinking and social, but not a lot of deep conversation or connection. Or you could be withdrawing from people. So a fleer can have a lot of responses to emotion that's about not feeling that emotion. Or they might, in fact, display anger or excessive positivity in order to shut down conflict, or to pretend that it's not there. And of course, for those that know about attachment theory, this is very relevant in attachment styles, where you have an avoidant attachment style. You have kinds of attachment style that reflect this work. And where does this happen? It can happen anywhere. It can happen, oh, I'm sorry, I missed a slide. Okay, I'll skip that slide. It can happen with our families. It can happen with work. It can happen with our friends. And a lot of times these traits might show up differently in different domains. If we don't experience a lot of distress at work, we might actually handle conflict between colleagues very well and are a great manager. It's like easy peasy. But then when it comes to dealing with your wife, all of a sudden you could be in paralysis. You can be a completely sane person as a parent. There really are some out there, relatively sane, and find it extremely hard to not have feelings of worry and guilt or anger towards your friends. So what's going on and where do we actually want to be? If we were to think about that simple state of empathy where someone's hurting and we just connect, none of this other extreme stuff. I want to offer you a teacher to help us think about what that might look like. And that teacher is my daughter. She asked me once what I do for a living. And I told her I, help people to help friends when they're sad. That's about my training work. And she said how easy that was. And she came up with a list of what you can do to help a friend. And I'm going to share that with you. Okay. And then ask you what you think about this list about being helpful.
You gave some ideas of what friends can do for each other when they're sad.
Friends can say I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to play with me? Want to sit down with me?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take a break? Do you want to have a little hug?
Et voila. What do people think about that list? Such a perfect list, says Blair. This is so much calmer and simpler than the other list. Beautifully simple. Yeah. So beautiful and clear. Yeah. Something happens between George's age and now where we get so freaked out about how to be there for others. What might be some of the things that get in the way? What might happen to us? What do you all think? And just put it in the chat. What's a present? Fear. Yes, Marianne. Yeah. Yeah. Fear. Anyone else? Anyone can elaborate on that or say their own word? Sometimes we've reached worried about not getting it right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Performing adulthood. Yeah. Yeah. Ain't that the truth? I think the doers in us want to do more than what is actually the most useful. Yeah. Yeah. When people are vulnerable, when they seem helpless, our first impulse is to fix it, of course. And we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to fix someone's problem. And when we can't, or when it seems too big, or when it's at the wrong friggin' time, or when it's with someone that you have a very ambivalent relationship with, when we put so much upon us to save other people, we start to experience guilt, resentment. We start to withdraw, shut down, feel exhausted. With Georgia, she's not worrying about saving anybody. She's just offering some small gestures. And a lot of times we have to figure out in our work with other people and in our relationship with other people, when we are burnt out, how can we feel enough? How can we feel enough? We are seeking competence. We are seeking lovability. These opportunities seem to be begging for that kind of desire. And they can also make us feel, extremely incompetent.
You gave some ideas of what friends can do for each other when they're sad.
Friends can do sorry.
Sorry about that. So sometimes when someone's in distress, our first instinct might be love me, admire me, or at least don't hate me. Don't think badly of me. Don't think that I'm selfish, that I'm mean. And so recognizing that this can happen to us, that our drive for love or for admiration can fuel our toxic relationship with empathy, is something to notice. And I want to say that this idea of striving for love or admiration, for competence, for fixing it, for being adorable, we have all elements of this within us. And I actually think that we get injured in the sense of lovability and competence all day, every day. Which is why doing something like a gratitude list is so important, where we write down what we're grateful for, because we have to sometimes intentionally remind ourselves what is lovable in our life, what is good in our lives. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about trauma and how trauma can impact, talk and research about how trauma impacts empathy. And so did the schema. And in Indian meditation practice that my husband does, they talk about samskaras, which are, in a sense, the everyday wounds that we get in life. And those wounds tend to have patterns. They tend to be ingrained in us, almost like scratches in our back. And as these grooves develop, the pain and suffering we experience goes into those same grooves. So those things that we call triggers, right, are those grooves that have just been deepened in us all day, every day. And so recognizing that we all are victim of this kind of samskara, and the practices that can help us heal that samskara is super important. Any thoughts or comments before I go on? Okay. So how can we get back away from these extremes, these thought traps that are absorbing or else shifting? How do we get away from these extremes that are about empathic distress and not simple empathy? How do we get to a Georgia state of mind? Some really important tools include just getting curious and noticing yourself. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Another cool tool is about making choices. And then another tool is to talk it through with trusted people and know if you want comfort or truth. So about getting curious. I love this quote. It's used a lot in empathy research and trainings by Dag Hammarskjöld. And he worked for the UN as an attorney general, assistant attorney general. And he says, the more faithfully you listen to the voices within you, the better you will hear what is sounding outside, right? That filter of empathic distress, recognizing what is distress versus actual emotional resonance with the other person. So something really important to do is to get curious about ourselves. And in fact, when we preoccupy ourselves with other people, we are taking attention away from ourselves. And it can be very hard and feel very self-indulgent to get curious and notice ourselves. But it is so important for noticing what is around us. And I have here a picture of a feelings wheel as one type of tool that people use to help really understand what they are feeling in a situation. That somebody's joy makes you feel resentful. What the hell? I can't feel empathic joy for this person. What's going on? So just getting curious about yourself. The second one, make choices. There's a lot of discussion, of course, about setting boundaries, which is what you'll accept and what you'll not accept, what you'll tolerate from other people and what you won't tolerate from other people. And I think that's very important. And I think depending on your empathy type, you might actually want to be more nuanced and make some choices. Because for somebody who leans into avoidant behavior, setting boundaries might actually be very easy. Somebody who is a fretter might find setting boundaries extremely preoccupying because they don't know what's going to happen next. So this idea of making choices based on who you are and what you want out of this situation. And 3 key variables for doing that is to understand, do I want to express it? Right? Do I want to express what I'm feeling? And by expressing it to the person, even just to yourself in a journal, but to the other person, you are, as is said, you name it to tame it. You help calm yourself down and you can help potentially calm the situation down. But you don't always have to express it. Sometimes you might decide to repress it. Don't take the bait. Don't let it pass. If you're somebody who tends to be a foister and always react and always try to fix, you might want to practice not fixing. You might want to practice sitting this one out and see what happens. See if the world falls apart around you. If you are a fleer, you might actually want to talk about it and figure out a way to talk about it. So this idea of making choices and knowing then that you have choices. Our thought traps, our feelings of guilt and worry can make us feel that we don't have a choice. So recognizing, what are my choices? And then finally, talking it through with trusted people. And sometimes we just want comfort and we want to share with somebody what's going on and don't need feedback. And then sometimes we want to probe a little deeper. When we just want to talk with somebody, I think so often now we are out of practice with talking with our friends about deep stuff, about real stuff. We're out of practice about talking with our family members. COVID, technology has really gotten us out of practice. So you might have to be the one to lead and set the tone for that kind of conversation. Also, of course, how can I not say therapy? Therapy is an excellent place to tease through these experiences of empathic distress that you feel so ashamed to even say out loud. You need to be able to say them because they will eke through in passive aggressive behavior, in avoidant behavior, in shutting down. So that's tool number 3. And then to conclude, almost conclude, I just want to give you some Insta nuggets, even though I don't do Instagram, that for the fretter, trust that small actions make a big difference. Small actions make a big difference. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be this major pleaser. And for the flutter, to step back and know that listening speaks volumes. Fixing, doing, practice stepping back and let the other person take center stage. And then for the fleer, that being uncomfortable isn't always bad. That weird feeling, that awkward, you just might not be used to it. So when we feel that we're not doing enough, when we feel that others are asking too much of us, when we may actually be engaged with thought traps, we may actually have just some empathic distress, but when we feel too much is being asked of us, to remember that in our village, your adequate little gesture is awesome, because adequate is better than burnout. And that's it. Any thoughts? Comments? Compliments, as they say in elementary school? Does anyone have any questions? Oh, you're welcome, Blair. Thank you for showing up again. What's an example of a little gesture? Great question, Teresa. So many. It really depends on the situation. Thank you, Marianne. A little gesture. Say, for example, as a doctor and you're with a patient and you are dealing with somebody diagnosed with stage 4 and you wish it weren't happening and you feel so guilty for not being able to fix it. And so you might avoid the feeling with this patient that they have about knowing that they aren't going to live for as long as they thought. And you may then get into clinical speak, and with that clinical speak, try to somehow pretend, deny the reality of the situation. And the more helpless you feel, the more you start talking and really not helping. A little gesture for that person might just be hand on the knee. I'm so sorry. Any other questions? Maybe we don't have many people on. I can't think of anything else to talk about. Oh, here's a new message. Yeah, and you know what's funny, Nicole, is research, neurological research, where people have monitored brain activity of research participants who mimic being in some kind of distress, right? They need help. There's some, researchers simulate a kind of distressing environment. That person needs help. And then another research subject is in a person to give help, some kind of very simple aid. The person who gets anxious and frets in their help and asks a lot of questions is actually more distressing for the person in need, is more anxious provoking, which is why very often when somebody is a fretter or a flutter, someone might respond and say, it's really not that bad. I'm going to be okay. They're trying to get that person to back off a little bit. So knowing that actually very often our smaller gestures can be quite powerful is good to remember. Oh, you're so welcome, Carrie. Thank you. Carrie is my boss. Any other comments or questions? Which type am I? It really depends on the situation. I feel that I am a big fretter when in the office with colleagues, and very preoccupied with doing it right around as a manager. And then as a flutter, I would say, I don't know if I flood too often. And for a long time, I fleed. That's what got me started in this work to begin with. I would flee when people were in a difficult time. I figured, I feel very uncomfortable with this person's situation. This probably means that I shouldn't be here. And I would ignore it. And now I ignore far fewer situations and it stresses me out a lot less. That's the paradox. When you feel less empathic distress, when you feel less ruled by those thought traps, it actually becomes easier to give. Anyone else? I've never had a session end early. I don't know what to do with myself.
Someone's asking about your book or website.
Oh, well, I can be found at A Good Place Therapy, which I just want to say is such an incredible team of practitioners. They're so brilliant and compassionate and dedicated. So people who are looking for therapy, I just want to say they're amazing. And I'm there too. If you're interested more in just around empathy kinds of work, I have a website called empathybootcamp.com. Take a breath and a break. Oh, thanks, Blair. That sounds like Georgia would say that. Yeah. Okay. Well. Oh, you're welcome, Nadia. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, here, I'll put it in the chat. Oh, wait, what is that? Here, I'll do that last slide again, or I don't know if it's on there, but this is A Good Place Therapy. And I just want to thank Carrie and Daniela for inviting me to share with our community this idea of empathy that so many of us as practitioners and as human beings deal with all the time.
Thank you, Kelsey, for all of your knowledge and sharing it with us. Someone did ask earlier if the slides will be available. I guess they'll be on the recording.
They'll be on the recording. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that'll be up on our website.
Yeah, I'll get that up there in a few days, and I'll also send an email out to everyone once it's live.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kelsey, for everything and all of the effort and work you've put into the presentation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Bye. Bye, Nicole. Thank you, Blair. Bye, Anna. Bye, Elena. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marianne.
Thank you.
You.